My ex lied about her job while I paid all bills, so I closed our joint accounts and left her with only her lies. I'm a 28-year-old guy who always believed that providing stability was the foundation of a real relationship. Maybe that belief came from growing up in a house where the electricity bill was always a question mark and dinner depended on my dad finding extra work. I remember lying awake as a kid, hearing my parents whisper about overdue notices and promising myself that when I finally had someone to love, they'd never feel that kind of fear. That promise shaped everything about me, how I worked, how I saved, how I loved. I met Jenna on a humid August afternoon at a friend's barbecue. She had this soft voice, warm smile, and a way of talking that made you feel like she was letting you into a private world. She told me she worked at a marketing agency, but her income was inconsistent because her projects came in waves. I remember nodding and saying, "It's okay. I get it. Life's unstable sometimes." She smiled at me like I'd just handed her a lifeline. Within weeks, I started taking care of things: rent, groceries, utilities, gas, most dates. I told myself, she just needs time to get stable. I can carry us for now. She'd wrap her arms around me at night and whisper, "You're the first man who ever made me feel safe." And hearing that felt like everything I'd ever wanted to be. Our tiny apartment smelled like fresh detergent and takeout noodles most nights, and the soft yellow lamp in the corner made the room feel warmer than it really was. I'd watch Jenna curled on the couch, laughing at something on her phone, and think, this is what security looks like. This is what I'm building. I didn't know, sitting there in that dim, comfortable room, that trust alone doesn't build a partnership. Truth does. And something in her smile. I'd learn later it wasn't truth at all. I started noticing the shift slowly, like a draft slipping through a closed window, subtle enough to ignore, but cold enough to feel. Jenna began telling me her company was restructuring, and her paychecks were delayed again. She'd sigh dramatically while scrolling through her phone and say, "It's just so stressful right now. Can you cover this week's bills until things settle?" And because I wanted to believe I was the kind of man who showed up, I always said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. I've got us." But the delays never stopped. Instead, they became the new normal. Groceries? Me. Utilities? Me. Gas, car maintenance, internet bill, takeout? Always me. One night while I cooked pasta in our tiny kitchen, she leaned against the counter with a tired look and said, "I swear things will get better soon. Just be patient with me." The steam from the pot fogged my glasses, and I remember wiping them clean, telling myself that her expression looked genuine, that exhaustion could be mistaken for guilt, and I was probably imagining things. But her spending didn't match her stress. Packages started arriving at our door every few days. Clothes, skincare, gadgets. Each one wrapped in cheerful colors that didn't match the dull heaviness in my chest. When I'd ask, "Didn't you say money was tight?" she'd respond softly, "It was on sale, and I'll pay you back soon, I promise." That word, soon, started sounding like a lullaby meant to keep me quiet. Our living room was often cluttered with new purchases, and the faint smell of jasmine from her candles mixed with the anxiety I tried to swallow. At night, when she curled against me and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you," I wanted to believe it was love. But a small voice inside me whispered that she needed me, not because she valued me, but because I made her life easier. I didn't listen. Not yet. But the imbalance was already growing, and something in me was starting to notice. The red flags didn't come waving. They drifted in quietly, like dust you don't notice until the light hits it just right. I started realizing Jenna never talked about coworkers, deadlines, office drama, nothing resembling a real job. When I'd casually ask, "So, how was work today?" she'd give this vague shrug and say, "Same old stress, corporate life sucks," before immediately changing the subject. The way she dodged details felt off, like she was trying to answer a question she hadn't prepared for. There were mornings she claimed she had early Zoom meetings, yet she'd still be wrapped in blankets at noon, scrolling through her phone with the curtains half closed. Sunlight would cut through the dusty blinds and slanted lines, illuminating her unbothered expression as she laughed at TikToks. I'd stand there with my work bag, tying my shoes, thinking, how can someone with so many meetings never actually take a call? One evening, I asked gently, "Hey, do you want help updating your resume or something?" Maybe things would get better if. She cut me off with an annoyed, Why are you always questioning me? Can't you just trust that I'm doing my best? Her reaction hit me harder than it should have. I wasn't accusing her of anything. I was just trying to understand the woman I was supporting. Then came the strangest moment. Her family. During a dinner at her mom's house, they kept bragging about Jenna's high-level consulting job and asking her about clients. She smiled confidently and answered like she had a whole career going. I sat there, chewing my food, feeling my heartbeat slow as confusion settled deep in my chest. If she had a real job, why was she broke? Why the constant delays? Why the secrecy? But back then, I convinced myself I must have misunderstood, because admitting the alternative, that she was lying, felt like breaking the foundation I had built my entire life around. Still, the first cracks had begun to show, and I couldn't unsee them anymore. The pressure didn't hit all at once. It built slowly, tightening around my chest day by day like a belt pulled one notch further every week. As my workload increased, I started waking up exhausted, already thinking about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter. Meanwhile, Jenna stayed curled under blankets until late morning, claiming she was emotionally drained from work I never actually saw her doing. When I'd ask, "Hey, can we talk about the electric bill? It shot up this month," she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "Why are you so obsessed with money lately?" Her tone always left me feeling like I was the unreasonable one. One evening, while I was sorting receipts at the dining table, she dropped onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. "I'm working on a big client project," she said, grabbing a throw blanket. "I just need support right now, not interrogation." Support. That word hit differently that I glanced at the untouched laptop beside her, the same laptop she hadn't opened in days, and quietly said, "I'm not interrogating you. I just need us to be on the same page." She snapped back. "Then stop making me feel like I'm failing," her voice sharp enough to cut through the stale air in the room. I remember sitting there, staring at her, feeling something inside me deflate. The lamp cast a warm glow over the apartment, but the room felt colder than ever. My hands smelled like the ink from the receipts, and the faint hum of the fridge was the only thing grounding me. I kept wondering why asking simple questions felt like navigating a minefield. Despite everything, her defensiveness, the inconsistencies, the emotional distance, I still told myself she was overwhelmed, not dishonest. I kept thinking maybe I was the one expecting too much. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, the truth was becoming harder to drown out. Something was cracking in her facade, and something in me was beginning to shift, too. The truth didn't arrive gently. It hit me like a punch I never saw coming. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a call from Jenna's sister, someone who rarely reached out to me directly. Her voice sounded hesitant, almost guilty, as she said, "Listen, did Jenna ever tell you she quit her job months ago?" My stomach dropped so hard I actually had to sit down, the world tilting slightly as fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I managed to choke out, "Quit?" She told me she was still working there. Her sister paused, then whispered, "No, she was fired." Those 3 words cracked something in me. She explained that Jenna had been terminated for chronic absenteeism and missing deadlines. Apparently, everyone in her family knew, but assumed Jenna had told me. I could barely process it. My heart pounded loud enough that I couldn't hear the background noise of the office anymore. When I asked, "Why didn't anyone say anything?" her sister replied softly, "We thought it wasn't our place. We thought you knew." But I didn't. I knew nothing. When the call ended, I stared at my phone, feeling a coldness spread through my chest. My hands were shaking as I opened our joint banking app, something I hadn't done in weeks because I trusted her explanations. Transaction after transaction flashed across the screen. Online orders, salon visits, food deliveries, random withdrawals I never noticed mounting. Each line item felt like another betrayal, another lie she had carefully layered on top of my trust. There, in the middle of my workday, surrounded by the smell of printer ink and stale coffee, I felt the truth settle like a heavy stone. She hadn't been overwhelmed. She hadn't been struggling. She had been lying, for months, about everything. And as I stared at the fading battery icon on my phone, one thought formed with terrifying clarity. If she hid this, what else had she been lying about? When I got home that night, the apartment felt different, like the air itself was heavier, holding secrets I could finally see. I didn't confront Jenna immediately. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the dim overhead light casting long shadows across the receipts and unopened mail. My hands moved on their own as I dug deeper. Bank statements, transaction histories, timestamps. The numbers didn't just confirm what I feared. They exposed layers of deceit I never imagined. There were charges at cafes she told me she worked from, salon appointments scheduled during the hours she claimed she was on Zoom calls, and weekend withdrawals labeled as errands that were far too high to make sense. At one point I whispered, "What were you doing, Jenna?" even though she wasn't home. My voice sounded small, like I was talking to a stranger I'd never really known. When she finally walked through the door, the smell of vanilla lotion trailing behind her, she looked surprised to see me awake. "You're home early," she said casually, dropping her bag on the couch. I stared at her for a long moment before asking, "Jenna, why are there hundreds of dollars missing every week?" Her smile didn't falter, it froze. "Are you seriously going through our accounts?" "That's paranoid." I replied quietly. "Your sister called. She told me about the job." Her face shifted, panic, then anger, then something colder. She stepped back and snapped, "My family hates me. They're trying to ruin my life. And now you're helping them." Her voice rose with every word, but mine didn't. "I just want the truth," I said, feeling my chest tighten. She stormed past me, slamming the bedroom door so hard the picture frame on the wall rattled. I stood alone in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Everything I touched, her coat on the chair, the mug on the counter, felt like a reminder that I'd been living with a version of her that never existed. And for the first time, a terrifying question formed in my mind. If she could lie this easily, was there anything she wouldn't lie about? The next 2 days felt like living inside a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Jenna didn't come home. No texts, no calls, nothing but the echo of the slammed bedroom doors still vibrating in my memory. I barely slept, lying on the couch with the TV on mute, staring at the ceiling while streetlights cast shifting shadows across the living room walls. Every hour that passed made the knot in my chest twist tighter. I kept checking my phone like some pathetic reflex, hoping for a message that never came. When Jenna finally walked in on the third night, the sharp scent of perfume hit me before I saw her. She tossed her purse to the floor and said coldly, "Well, I hope you're done violating my privacy." I stood slowly, my voice cracking when I asked, "Where have you been?" She scoffed, brushing past me. "Out." Clearing my head. "Something you clearly don't understand because you're too busy controlling everything." That word again, controlling.it sank into me like a hook. I followed her into the dimly lit living room where only the soft glow from the streetlights illuminated her face. Quietly, I said, "I've been paying every bill, every expense, every part of this life. And you lied to me about working." She spun around, eyes blazing. "So what? You're supposed to help the person you love. You owed me stability while I figured things out." Those words shattered something inside me so violently I felt it physically, like my ribs had tightened around my lungs. "Owed you?" I whispered, barely hearing my own voice. She crossed her arms, chin lifted. "Yes. After everything I've been through, the least you could do is support me without interrogating me like some toxic boyfriend." Her words were so twisted, so backwards, that my mouth fell open and no sound came out. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sank onto the cold tile floor. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, making my reflection in the mirror look hollow, like I was disappearing into someone else's story. And for the first time, I wondered if I had become nothing more than a wallet she could manipulate at will. The morning after our argument, the apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were leaning inward, closing me into a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. I sat at the edge of the bed with the curtains half open, watching pale sunlight spill across the floorboards. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts slow and sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. I knew something had snapped in me the night before, but it wasn't until I called my best friend, Malik, that the break became undeniable. He answered on the second ring. "Bro, you sound wrecked. What happened?" I hesitated, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think Jenna's been using me." There was a long pause before he said, "No. She has been using you. You just didn't want to see it." Hearing those words out loud made my stomach twist. I told him everything. Her lies, the job, the spending, the manipulation. While I talked, my voice cracked more than once, and I found myself pacing the living room, feeling the rug scratch under my feet with every step. Malik didn't sugarcoat anything. You've been carrying a grown woman while she sits at home, spending your money. That's not love. That's exploitation. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my hands over my face, the smell of last night's takeout still lingering in the air. I don't know why I kept believing her, I whispered. Because you're loyal, he said. And she knows exactly how to use that. His words hit harder than I expected. All the moments I'd convinced myself she was stressed, overwhelmed, misunderstood, they replayed in my mind with brutal clarity. She wasn't struggling. She was comfortable. Too comfortable. Comfortable enough to let me drown while she floated on excuses. For the first time, I saw her not as someone I loved, but as someone who benefited from my love and never once returned the effort. And in that realization, something cold and steady settled inside me. A decision was forming, quietly, but undeniably. Once clarity settled in, it didn't bring peace, just a strange, icy focus. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of cars outside and the soft rattle of the AC vent, planning in silent, meticulous detail. If Jenna could build an entire relationship on lies, then I needed to reclaim my life with truth and precision. The next morning, before she woke up, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and a folder of documents, the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. My hands were steady in a way they hadn't been in months. I started with the bank accounts. Scrolling through transactions felt like dissecting a wound. Painful, necessary, illuminating. I whispered to myself, not anymore. You won't take another dollar from me. Hearing that out loud felt like reclaiming part of my own voice. From there, I opened a new checking account, private, unlinked, entirely mine. By noon, I was digging into rental agreements, utilities, contracts. Every major bill was under my name. Every responsibility was tied to me, not her. She had no legal footing, no financial claim, no contribution that could trap me. The realization settled like armor around my chest. As I worked, Jenna wandered into the kitchen, hair messy, voice groggy. Why are you up so early? I didn't look up, just handling some things for work. She shrugged and grabbed a yogurt from the fridge, completely unaware of the life shifting beneath her feet. The faint sound of the spoon scraping plastic echoed in the quiet room, irritatingly casual. When she left to meet her friends later that afternoon, wearing a dress I unknowingly paid for, I watched her close the door behind her. The apartment fell silent, the kind of silence that feels strategic, not empty. That's when I moved, that I transferred my upcoming paycheck into the private account, that I closed our joint card, that I changed passwords she didn't even know I knew she had access to. By the time evening light spilled across the floor, warm and golden, I realized I had done it. I had taken back control. And Jenna still had no idea her entire safety net was gone. Jenna came home that night with the same careless confidence she always carried. The kind that used to look charming, but now just looked hollow. The door clicked shut behind her, and she tossed her purse on the couch like she lived in a world without consequences. I need money for a work retreat next weekend, she said, kicking off her shoes. It's last minute, but it's important. Can you transfer a few hundred tonight? Her voice was so casual, so entitled, it made something in me harden. I stood slowly from the dining table, my hands resting flat against the cool wood. Jenna, I said quietly, you don't have a job. She froze. Not dramatically, just a tiny, imperceptible pause that told me she hadn't expected the words to ever come out of my mouth. Then she turned, forcing a laugh. What are you talking about? Of course I do. No, I said. You were fired. Months ago. Her face shifted, just a flicker, but enough. Your sister told me. I added. And the bank statements? The withdrawals? I know everything. She stepped toward me, eyes narrowing. So you're spying on me now? You're listening to people who hate me? You're checking bank accounts like some kind of psycho. I felt strangely calm. I'm checking the accounts I paid for, I said. The ones you drained. The room grew heavy, the only sound the faint buzz from the refrigerator. Jenna's voice rose, brittle and sharp. You don't get to judge me. I've been stressed. I've been dealing with things you don't understand. I held up a folder, printed statements, timestamps, the truth laid bare. These say otherwise. Her eyes darted across the pages, and for the first time, I saw panic, not manipulation, not guilt tripping, real fear. You can't just cut me off, she whispered. I need you. No, I said. You needed my money. She staggered back like the words physically hit her. The joint accounts are closed, I said. You don't have access to anything anymore. The silence that followed felt like a building collapsing. And for the first time, I saw her without the mask, just desperation and the realization that her lies were finally cornering her. Jenna's panic didn't explode. It cracked, slow and jagged, like thin ice failing under pressure. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed her mother first, pacing the living room with quick, frantic steps. Mom, he's cutting me off. He's being abusive, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. I stood near the hallway, watching the scene unfold under the soft glow of the floor lamp, feeling strangely detached, as if I were witnessing someone else's life. Whatever response she got on the other end wasn't what she wanted, because her face fell, and she hissed, "Fine. Whatever," before hanging up. Then she called her sister. Her sister didn't even let her finish. I heard the muffled voice through the phone. Jenna, you lied. Fix your own mess. Jenna's jaw clenched, and she shot me a venomous glare as though it were my fault her world was finally reflecting her choices. She spun toward me. You ruined my life, she said, her voice raw that I shook my head. No, you ruined it when you lied. I just stopped funding the fantasy. Her breath hitched, and she stepped closer, tears forming. Not sorrowful tears, but the frustrated, cornered kind. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You can't just abandon me. I felt a sting in my chest, but it wasn't guilt. It was the echo of every time I had begged for honesty and gotten manipulation instead. You have 1 week to move out, I said softly. No money. No more lies. Just figure it out, Jenna. She let out a choked sound, half disbelief, half rage. You're heartless. But her words no longer hit. They slid off like water over stone. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to make the picture frame on the wall tilt that I sat on the couch. The apartment finally quiet, glowing in the amber streetlight leaking through the blinds. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like breathing again. The week that followed felt surreal, like watching a storm lose power after months of tearing through your life. Jenna moved around the apartment with this frantic urgency, pulling clothes from drawers, slamming cabinets, muttering under her breath. Every sound echoed in the quiet space. Hangers clacking, zippers snapping, bags hitting the hardwood floor. I stayed out of her way, sitting at the dining table most nights with a mug of tea, listening to the distant hum of traffic and letting the calm settle into me like a new language. It was strange, realizing peace had always been possible. I had just been too afraid to claim it. On her last day, she stood at the door with 2 overstuffed suitcases and eyes that flickered with something between anger and desperation. You're going to regret this, she said, voice trembling that I met her gaze steadily. No, Jenna. I regret staying this long. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out, just a shaky breath. Then she walked out, the door clicking shut behind her with a soft, final sound. 2 weeks passed. The apartment felt bigger, airier, like it had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. I cleaned shelves she never touched, threw out candles she never lit. Open windows she always kept closed. The sunlight felt different in the rooms now, warmer somehow. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Jenna's sister, just letting you know, she's working a minimum wage retail job now. Things caught up with her. I stared at the message, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet understanding. Actions have gravity. Lies eventually collapse under their own weight. I never replied. Instead, I put my phone down and walked to the balcony, letting the wind hit my face. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel heavy, it felt open. I had closed the accounts, but what I really closed was the chapter of my life where love meant losing myself. And standing there in the fading sunset, I realized something simple and freeing. She was left with only her lies. I finally had my life back.